The protests in Iran center around the enforcement of the hijab, but the hijab is not the main point of the protests. In the same way the hijab in Iran has become the symbol of the regime, taking it off has become the symbol of the protests and is used as a rallying cry. I'm your host, Armin Navabi. This is the Secular Jihadists. Since the 1979 revolution, women in Iran have been forced to wear the hijab. This battle between Iranian women and the regime is rooted in the early years of the regime's foundation. To better understand this, we have to look at the historical context of the hijab and the role it now plays as not just a religious mandate, but also a political tool. Shia Islam became Iran's official religion during Safavid dynasty's reign, beginning in 1501. Since then, there has been a mutual agreement between the monarchy, or the Shah, and the Shia clergy, the ulama. Shia religious leaders were invited by the Safavid kings, who offered them land and money in exchange for their loyalty. The ulama's influence grew later during the Qajar dynasty. The Qajar dynasty was overthrown by Reza Khan in 1925. He became the Shah of Iran, ushering in the Pahlavi dynasty. The Shah was inspired by the Turkish leader Ataturk, who was westernizing the country. After the Shah's 1936 visit to Turkey, Iran's societal structure and women's status began to improve. During this time, the state implemented social reforms such as mass education and paid employment for women. Reza Shah forbade the wearing of the Islamic hijab in public. This marked the start of a schism between the monarchy and the clergy. Most Iranians held high regard for the clergy or ulama. People were religious, traditional, and disaffected by Shah's westernization efforts. Reza Shah Pahlavi's rise to power in the 1920s put the clerical class on the defensive. His son, the second Pahlavi king, Mohammad Reza Shah, launched a series of reforms called the White Revolution, which posed a new challenge to the ulama and helped to expand women's legal rights. The ulama saw the White Revolution initiatives as dangerous, westernizing trends. Ruhollah Khomeini, a revolutionary cleric, saw them as an attack on Islam. Khomeini accused the Shah of submission to the United States and Israel. Ali Shariati was a socialist and a critic of the Shah. His Islamic left ideology was one of the most influential doctrines that led to the 1979 revolution. Shariati's interpretation of Islam as the only way of liberating the Third World from colonialism influenced many. Shariati aimed to resurrect Shia Islam's revolutionary spirit. Unlike Khomeini, Shariati did not believe in a government run by clerics. Shariati argued that the role of the clergy was to steer society away from the individualistic hedonism prevalent in the West. Khomeini's vision of a theocratic government directly opposed the ideology of Islamic leftists like Shariati. Yet, Khomeini did not hesitate to encourage these groups to join his supporters to overthrow the Shah. When discussing an Islamic government, Khomeini believed it was necessary to observe the principles of taqiyya, i.e., deception of the truth in defense of Islam. After the 1979 victory of the revolution, Khomeini abandoned taqiyya and made all efforts to establish an Islamic theocracy. Initially, Khomeini provided support to women. However, after assuming power, his views on women's rights shifted dramatically. Morality and modesty were regarded as fundamental feminine characteristics that required state protection. Veils were required for women. Ayatollah Khomeini decreed mandatory veiling for women at work on March 7, 1979. On March 8, International Women's Day, women took to the streets in large-scale protests against the compulsory hijab. Women on the left who had worn the veil as a symbol of opposition during the revolution had not expected it to become mandatory. "We didn't have a revolution to go backwards," the women chanted in opposition to attempts to limit their rights. The decree requiring veils was momentarily retracted in response to the protests. When the left and liberals were defeated and the conservatives took control, veiling was imposed on all women. After the 1979 revolution, Iran went through the Cultural Revolution from 1980 to 1983, during which Iranian academia was purged of Western and non-Islamic influences. Higher education in Iran was dominated by leftist forces opposed to Ayatollah Khomeini's Islamic State. Leftist guerrillas revolted. The Islamic Republic began coordinating extrajudicial killings, eliminating potential political opponents. Many prisoners from the MEK, a militant Islamic leftist group, were executed, as were many others from other leftist opposition groups. Several high-ranking members of Iran's current government, including current President Raisi, were involved in carrying out the executions. This was one of the largest mass executions of the second half of the 20th century that has been largely forgotten. On September 16, 2022, protests began in Tehran in response to the death of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini, who died after her arrest by the morality police for wearing hijab improperly. The protests, led mainly by women, grew larger than those of 2017 and 2019. Unlike some of the previous protests, the primary demand is now for the downfall of the theocratic regime, not for the hijab or the morality police to be reformed. The hijab has been enforced since the regime consolidated its power against all other competing forces. As a result, enforcing the hijab became a visible symbol of the regime's authority. It's a constant reminder of the victory of the 1979 Islamic Revolution and a constant warning of the presence of the regime's surveillance and its power of suppression. The regime's legitimacy comes from the pretense that the people of Iran want Islamic law. If it is shown that most people don't want Islamic law, there will be no point in having an Islamic Republic. For the protesters, the hijab represents a symbol of their oppression. When the hijab is the most visible symbol of the regime, taking it off becomes the most visible, symbolic act of defiance against the regime. Many anti-regime advocates make this clear by repeating the phrase, hijab is just an excuse, the regime itself is the target. From its very roots, the Islamic takeover of Iran's government was motivated by the traditional mindset of clerics to maintain control over women. This is why the latest protests against the regime are led by women. Today, Iranian women are defining a new feminist wave more in line with feminism's original roots. The uprising is an unintentional feminist movement where leadership is displayed rather than asked for in a project as large as the liberation of a nation. The goal of the uprising, although led by women, is to liberate all Iranians. The Islamic Republic has a history of discrimination against various religious, ethnic, and other groups, not just women. But since women are the largest discriminated against group in Iran, fighting against their oppression has become the symbol for standing against all of the regime's oppressive behavior. The view is that the clerics failed to bring prosperity by any measure and have thereby lost the approval of the rest of society. Hence, they use women's bodies as a convenient way to win support from their conservative base because they can't accomplish anything else. The women-led uprising in Iran has captured the attention of the entire world. The dichotomy of the innocence of schoolgirls standing up to a bloodthirsty regime has made many people worldwide sympathetic to their cause. The uprising united not just many Iranians, but many people across political lines from around the world supporting women in Iran. It's a movement that is neither left nor right-leaning. All the historic political groups that used to lead the opposition against the Islamic Republic are noticeably absent from the leadership. Another interesting thing about the uprising is that even though it is led by women, it insists on having men shoulder to shoulder with women. Shortly after the key protest chant became the Kurdish slogan, "Women, Life, Freedom," women were heard adding the chant, "Man, Nation, Prosperity." A fifth wave of feminism, sparked by the first female-led revolution in history, in a part of the world where it is needed the most, is already becoming a source of role models for female activists in the Middle East and elsewhere. Women in Iran have raised the bar, facing bullets for their liberation. I've been your host, Armin Navabi. This has been the Secular Jihadists. Don't forget to like and subscribe. If you want to support this channel, please become a YouTube member or support me on Patreon. Link in the description.